I'm here with Sarah Arthur, author of 10 books ranging from popular devotionals to serious engagement with literature and narrative. Among her most recent titles are Between Midnight and Dawn, At the Still Point, and Light Upon Light. A graduate of Wheaton College and Duke University Divinity School, she has served in full-time and volunteer youth ministry for over 20 years. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks, Brian.
As you know, Fredrik Beaker will soon be turning 90 years old. Is there anything you would like to wish him on this great milestone?
Well, thank you, Fred, first of all. And I can't believe I'm calling you Fred because I first encountered your works when I was in college, and you were Mr. Beekner then, and you'll probably always be Mr. Beekner. But I want to thank you for teaching those of us in ministry how to be honest about the dark places. And as you journey right now, I hope that you are still able to probe those places, but also find joy in the next decade and beyond.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you so much. I'm
Sure.
sure Mr. Beekner will greatly appreciate hearing from you. Next, can you tell me how you first learned about Mr.
Yeah, well, I mentioned I first read, I can't believe it was not till college, but Jill Baumgartner was teaching my senior seminar in literature at Wheaton College. And our theme that semester was The Fool in Literature. So, of course, she had us read the book of Beb. So it was all the Beb stories. And I was like, who is this guy? So I had no idea that Buechner had written all kinds of other nonfiction stuff and collections of his presentations and speaking and sermons. And so it was just this wonderful discovery. And from there, to encounter the rest of his work was great, and to stumble upon Godric later and Brendan and other stuff. It's just been, I came in through his fiction, which I think is not necessarily the customary route to Beekner. That's how I found him.
What is it that most attracts you to Mr. Beekner's writing?
Oh, so many things. I mean, one is the attention to the craft, and for someone who is also in ministry, that attention to the written word and the craft of it as an artistic object or process, that was really revolutionary to me, because to me, writing and ministry were in kind of two separate spheres. And to see a writer who was also in ministry but attending to the craft was really, really important to me. There are sentences and things that are just unforgettable from Beekner that I remember. And then also his vulnerability as somebody in ministry, sharing about dark places and places of doubt and places of wonder and worry. And that was vital too, because those are the things that many of us in ministry feel tempted to hide, particularly from our own congregations. So that was just huge for me.
How would you say his writing has influenced your career?
Oh, well, again, I think it's that honest vulnerability. So I write devotionals, but they tend to be pretty personal. I don't actually read devotional books, so, so I decided to write the kind of devotional books that I would want to read, which would be more sort of narrative, have a kind of narrative arc to them, where the author is a little bit more self-disclosing and you can feel like you're having a conversation with a friend. And there's so many ways that he has done that. I mean, I'm thinking of the Alphabet of Grace is one of those, where you just follow him through his day, breakfast with his family and driving in the rain and all of these things that are somehow he pulls God into it, and you feel like you are present to someone who is present to God, and that brings you closer to God's presence. And that is what I try to aim for in my writing, especially with the devotional material. So that's, I think, significantly it. I couldn't even hope to, with this fiction, I don't even know how he does it. So I wouldn't even try with my own fiction, maybe. But yeah, he's amazing.
So you've mentioned Alphabet of Grace. What other books of Mr. Beekner's have meant the most to you?
Well, telling the truth, the gospel is tragedy, comedy, and fairy tale. Absolutely kind of turned my world upside down. I wrote a book on the role of the imagination in spiritual formation, and the role of narrative in spiritual formation, and looking at how that it changes the way that we teach the Bible, especially in ministry settings, obviously. And that book was called The God-Hungry Imagination. And so when I engaged in that book, I think I quote Beekner throughout that book, the telling the truth, because it was so important. And then also, and this is sort of poignant, but when I was first in ministry as a young youth worker, the senior pastor of our church, my boss, my pastor, committed suicide. And I remember standing in his office with his wife, and this man had been incredibly well read, and we stood there and we looked at his vast library, trying, what are we going to do with this? And she said, he loved you like a daughter, and so any of this that you want is yours. And I could not bring myself to, it was overwhelming, but one title stood out, and I took it with me, and it was Beekner's A Room Called Remember. And it took me years before I could even read that copy of it. But it's just been a really important book to me for many reasons.
Yes, I can certainly appreciate that. So, more broadly speaking, what would you say Mr. Beekner's influence has been on Christianity and the world at large?
Well, again, I think that he's had this unique ability to kind of take away the veil of the minister as sort of unassailable, right? That the minister, the preacher, is somehow impervious to doubt and whistling in the dark. That the minister is somehow just unable to be moved by struggles in the world, and so I think the gift that he has given the church and the world is to say that ministers are and preachers are people who also struggle, and they often make that journey in very isolated ways. And so I think it allows the reader and the congregation to minister to the minister after they encounter Beekner's writings. They have a sensitivity to their pastor that maybe they didn't have before, and in understanding that they're not alone. The pastor's not alone, and the congregation isn't alone in their journeys of doubt and struggle.
Thank you. I realize this next question is a little bit difficult, but if you were able to sum up Fred in a few words, what would you say?
Oh, yeah. It's so impossible to me. He's larger than life in some ways. I would say he's a writer in the valley who has a glimpse of the path that takes us up to the light. And instead of him saying, I know the way, he says, I kind of don't want to do this alone. Would you walk with me?
That's really wonderful. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
So that concludes our interview. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your being a part of Mr. Beekner's 90th birthday.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a pleasure.